If you could hold a remote control for human history and skip from one world-changing invention to the next, what would those moments be? Not every invention on this list is flashy, some don't look impressive at all, but they completely changed how humans live, work, think, and even how long we survive. In this video, we'll walk through 10 inventions that did not just improve life a bit, they pushed humanity into an entirely new stage. We'll start when humans were small tribes on the move. And end with the technology you might be using to watch this video right now. Let's begin. For 99% of our time on Earth, we humans lived a life of constant motion. We were hunter-gatherers, small family groups roaming vast territories, our existence a delicate dance with nature. Our survival depended on our intimate knowledge of the land, the habits of the animals we hunted and the locations of the wild plants we gathered. Life was precarious, dictated entirely by what the environment could provide from one day to the next. The idea of a permanent home, of a future beyond the next season, was an unimaginable luxury. And then, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't a sudden dramatic event, but a slow, quiet revolution that began roughly 12,000 years ago. Somewhere, likely in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, an unknown ancestor of ours made a profound connection. They observed that the seeds from the wild grasses they gathered, if dropped or planted in the soil, would grow into new plants the following season. This simple act of saving and sowing seeds seems almost trivial to us now, but it was arguably the single most important discovery in human history. It was the birth of agriculture. This was not just a new way of finding food, it was a new way of life. For the first time, we were not merely taking from nature, we were actively shaping it to suit our needs. The implications were staggering. The nomadic lifestyle, which had defined us for hundreds of thousands of years, began to fade. Why wander in search of food when you could grow it, reliably, in one place? Small temporary camps gave way to the first permanent settlements. These were the earliest villages, clusters of mud brick huts nestled beside fields of domesticated wheat and barley. Life became anchored to the soil and the rhythm of the harvest. This newfound stability provided a security our ancestors had never known. The constant pressing threat of starvation began to recede, if only slightly. With this security came a phenomenon that would underpin all future progress: the surplus. For the first time, a community could produce more food than it needed for its immediate survival. This excess grain stored in communal granaries was a buffer against lean times, a form of wealth and a catalyst for change. It meant that not every single person had to spend their entire day farming. A new kind of human society could now emerge, one built on cooperation and specialization. Some individuals could now dedicate their time to other tasks. Potters could create vessels to store the surplus grain and water. Weavers could craft textiles from cultivated flax. Tool makers could refine their skills, creating better plows and sickles. And leaders or priests could emerge to manage the surplus, organize the community, and oversee the rituals that were believed to ensure a bountiful harvest. The village was becoming a complex organism with many interconnected parts, all sustained by the farmer's toil. This specialization of labor was the seed of civilization itself. As villages grew larger and more prosperous, they evolved into the world's first towns, and eventually into sprawling cities like Uruk and Babylon. These bustling urban centers became hubs of trade, culture, and power. Grand temples were built, complex irrigation systems were engineered, and social hierarchies became firmly established. The surplus of food supported kings, armies, scribes, and artisans, none of whom directly produced their own sustenance. All of this, the cities, the art, the politics, the very concept of a state, was built upon the humble foundation of a cultivated seed. The shift to agriculture irrevocably altered our relationship with the planet. We began to clear forests, divert rivers, and domesticate animals, fundamentally reshaping ecosystems to our will. It set us on a new trajectory, one of ever-increasing complexity and control, for better and for worse. Our journey from a wandering primate to the master of the planet began here, in a patch of tilled earth. Imagine a world without rotation, a world where every single object, no matter how heavy, had to be dragged or carried. This was the human reality for millennia. Our ability to move goods was limited by the strength of our own muscles or those of the animals we had domesticated. Building monuments, transporting harvests, and engaging in trade were monumental undertakings, defined by friction and brute force. Then, around 5,500 years ago in Mesopotamia, another deceptively simple invention appeared. One that would literally get civilization moving. It was the wheel. Its first use, fascinatingly, was not for transport. The earliest evidence points to the potter's wheel, a heavy rotating disc of stone or clay that allowed artisans to shape vessels with a speed and symmetry previously impossible. This was a revolution in itself, enabling the mass production of pottery for storage and trade. But the true genius was in seeing the potential of this horizontal rotation and turning it vertical. The concept of placing a platform over a pair of wheels connected by an axle was a leap of mechanical insight that would change everything. The challenge was immense. It was not simply a matter of cutting a slice from a tree trunk. A solid disc of wood is heavy, brittle, and prone to splitting. The true innovation was the wheel and axle assembly. The axle had to fit snugly enough into the central hole of the wheel to be stable, but turn freely enough to reduce friction. This required remarkable precision and craftsmanship. Early wheels were made from solid wooden planks, pegged together, a heavy and cumbersome solution, but one that worked. It allowed humanity to overcome the tyranny of friction. Suddenly, the world became smaller. A single ox, which could drag a heavy sledge, could now pull a cart carrying 3 or 4 times that weight. The surplus grains from our first chapter could now be transported over vast distances, linking burgeoning cities and distant communities in a web of commerce. Raw materials like timber, stone, and metal could be brought to urban centers from further and further afield, fueling construction and industry on an unprecedented scale. The wheel became the engine of ancient economies. This new mobility did not just carry goods, it carried people and, crucially, ideas. Armies could now move with greater speed and logistical support, enabling the growth and administration of the first great empires. Migrants and merchants traveled along newly established trade routes, and with them, they brought their languages, their beliefs, their technologies, and their customs. The wheel was a great connector, accelerating the cross-pollination of cultures across continents, from the chariots of the Egyptians to the carts of the Indus Valley. The principle of the wheel, that of continuous rotational motion, became a cornerstone of mechanical invention. It was adapted to create water wheels, which used the power of rivers to grind grain or power bellows, freeing human and animal labor for other tasks. It formed the basis of pulleys and gears, complex systems that allowed us to lift immense weights and construct the great cathedrals and monuments of the ancient and medieval world. The spinning wheel revolutionized the production of textiles, clothing entire populations. From the simple potter's wheel to the intricate clockwork of a medieval timepiece, the fundamental principle remained the same. It is an idea so deeply embedded in our technological world that we often fail to see it. Every car, every train, every airplane relies on it. Every engine, every turbine, every tiny motor in the devices that surround us is a direct descendant of that first solid wooden disc. It is the silent spinning heart of our mechanical world, an invention that transformed the simple act of moving things, and, in doing so, set humanity on the road to modernity. Before the written word, memory was the only library. History was not a text to be read, but a story to be told, passed from one generation to the next through the fragile medium of the human voice. Law was tradition, knowledge was experience, and a person's word was their only bond. An entire culture's wisdom, its myths, its genealogies, and its vital survival skills were held captive within the minds of its elders. If a generation failed to pass on this oral tradition, it was lost forever, like a breath in the wind. This was a world of immediacy, a world without a permanent record. Then, around the same time and in the same crucible of civilization as the wheel, another transformation began. In the bustling city-states of Sumer, administrators were faced with a growing problem. As agriculture and trade became more complex, how could they possibly keep track of it all? How many sheep were in a temple's flock? How much grain was paid in taxes? How much silver was owed to a merchant? Memory was no longer sufficient. A new tool was needed, not for shaping clay or moving goods, but for capturing thought itself. This tool was writing. It began not as a way to record poetry or history, but as a form of accounting. The earliest writing, known as cuneiform, consisted of simple pictograms, stylized drawings of a head of barley, a bull, a person, pressed into wet clay tablets with a reed stylus. Each symbol represented an object or a quantity. These were essentially ledgers, bureaucratic records of transactions. They were practical, mundane, and utterly revolutionary. For the first time, information could exist outside of a human brain. A spoken agreement, once ephemeral, could now be made permanent and indisputable. This ability to externalize memory had profound consequences. It allowed for the creation of complex legal codes, such as the famous Code of Hammurabi, where laws were inscribed in stone for all to see. Justice was no longer arbitrary, it was codified and consistent. Rulers could now administer vast empires, sending written decrees to governors hundreds of miles away, confident that their exact words would be received. History ceased to be a fluid myth and began to be a documented chronicle of events, of kings and battles and dynasties. As writing systems evolved, from simple pictures to more abstract symbols representing sounds, phonetic alphabets, their power grew exponentially. Now, anything that could be spoken could be written down. The inner world of human consciousness, our stories, our philosophies, our scientific observations, our deepest emotions, could be given tangible form. A thought conceived in one person's mind in one century could be perfectly preserved and transmitted to a reader in another, thousands of years later. It was a form of time travel. This preservation of knowledge created a cumulative effect. Isaac Newton famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Writing provided those shoulders. Scholars in Alexandria could study the geometry of Euclid, Renaissance astronomers could build upon the work of Ptolemy, and philosophers throughout the ages could engage in a great conversation with Plato and Aristotle. Each generation did not have to rediscover the world anew. They could start with the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. Writing separated the knowledge from the knower. It democratized information, at least for the literate few. A farmer's son who learned to read could access a world of ideas far beyond his immediate experience. It created a new class of people, the scribes, the scholars, the intellectuals, whose power lay not in land or military might, but in their mastery of the written word. It changed the very structure of our minds, encouraging linear, logical thought. It is the technology that makes all other advanced technologies possible, the foundational code upon which our entire global civilization is built. For thousands of years after its invention, the power of writing remained in the hands of a select few. Books were precious, sacred objects, each one painstakingly copied by hand by scribes, a process that could take months or even years. A single library, like the one at Alexandria, was a treasure of incalculable worth, and its destruction was a catastrophic loss for all humanity. Knowledge was stored in these fragile vessels, but it was not easily accessible. It was a treasure locked in a vault available only to the clergy, the nobility, and the wealthiest of merchants. This was a world of information scarcity. Then, in the mid-15th century in the German city of Mainz, a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg combined several existing technologies into an invention that would shatter this world forever. He brought together the screw press used for making wine, oil-based inks, and his most crucial innovation, movable type. By creating individual metal letters that could be arranged to form words, locked into a frame, inked, and pressed onto paper, Gutenberg devised a way to reproduce text with astonishing speed and accuracy. The printing press was born. The first major book, printed using this new technology, was, fittingly, the Bible. A Gutenberg Bible was still a magnificent and expensive object, but it could be produced in a fraction of the time it took to create a single hand-copied manuscript. Where a scribe might produce one book, Gutenberg's press could produce hundreds. This was not merely an improvement in efficiency, it was a fundamental shift in the scale of information distribution. For the first time in history, knowledge had the potential to be mass-produced. The effects rippled across Europe with astonishing speed. Within a few decades, printing presses had been established in hundreds of cities. The cost of books plummeted. Ideas that had once been confined to monasteries and universities now flowed out into the wider world. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, were printed and distributed across Germany in a matter of weeks, igniting the Protestant Reformation. The press became a powerful weapon in religious and political conflicts, allowing leaders to communicate directly with the people. This sudden availability of texts fueled an explosion in literacy. As books became more affordable, more people had a reason to learn to read. This created a positive feedback loop. Greater literacy drove demand for more books, which in turn encouraged even more people to read. It was the dawn of the public sphere, a space where ideas could be debated and public opinion could be formed. The monopoly on information held by the church and state was broken forever. The scientific revolution was carried on the back of the printing press. Scientists like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton could publish their findings, allowing their work to be scrutinized, replicated, and built upon by a community of scholars across the continent. Diagrams, charts, and mathematical equations could be reproduced with perfect fidelity, eliminating the errors that inevitably crept into hand-copied manuscripts. Science became a collaborative, international enterprise, accelerating the pace of discovery at an exponential rate. The printing press did more than just spread ideas, it standardized them. It helped to fix national languages, codifying spelling and grammar as printers chose a single dialect for their works. It created a shared sense of identity among people who read the same texts in the same language. It transformed our very conception of knowledge from something fluid and communal to something stable, authoritative, and individually owned. It laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, for democratic revolutions, and for the modern, information-rich world we inhabit today. It turned the key and unlocked the vault. For centuries, the landscape of power was carved in stone. The medieval world was dominated by the castle, a fortress of immense strength that projected the authority of the lord who commanded it. Warfare was a personal, brutal affair, defined by the clash of steel on steel, the strength of a knight's arm, and the skill of the bowman. Social order was rigid, a feudal hierarchy where a warrior class, clad in expensive plate armor and trained from birth in the arts of combat, held sway over a peasantry tied to the land. This was a world built on walls and defended by swords, but a new force was coming from the east, a strange black powder invented by Chinese alchemists searching for an elixir of immortality. They'd found not eternal life, but a substance with the power to unleash immense energy in an instant. This was gunpowder. Initially used for fireworks and primitive rockets, its military potential was slowly realized. When this technology reached Europe in the 13th century, it found a continent ripe for a military revolution. The age of the knight and the castle was about to come to a violent end. The first firearms were crude, unreliable, and dangerous to their users. Early cannons, known as bombards, were essentially giant iron pots capable of lobbing stone balls with dubious accuracy. Yet, even these primitive weapons held a power that no traditional defense could withstand. The thundering roar of a cannon was the sound of a new era. A stone wall that could resist a siege for months, that had been the ultimate symbol of security and power, could now be battered into rubble in a matter of days, or even hours. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction. The castle, once a safe refuge, became a trap. The knight, whose expensive armor and years of training had made him a dominant force on the battlefield, was now vulnerable. A peasant, with minimal training, could be given a simple handgun, an arquebus, and, with a pull of a trigger, fell the most powerful aristocrat from a distance. The mystique of the warrior elite was shattered. Warfare was becoming impersonal, mechanized, and far more deadly. This technological shift drove a profound political transformation. Only the wealthiest rulers, kings and emerging nation-states could afford the vast quantities of gunpowder and the foundries needed to cast the new, more effective bronze cannons. Local lords and their castles could no longer defy a monarch who could bring an artillery train to their gates. Power, which had been fragmented and distributed among a feudal nobility, began to consolidate in the hands of centralized governments. The modern state, with its monopoly on violence, was forged in the fire of gunpowder. On the open battlefield, tactics were completely rewritten. The disciplined formations of pikemen, which had dominated late medieval warfare, gave way to formations of musketeers firing in volleys. Armies grew larger, and the logistics of supplying them with powder and shot became a primary concern of the state. This led to the growth of bureaucracy and new forms of taxation to fund these ever more expensive military machines. The gunpowder empires of Europe used this new military superiority to expand across the globe, colonizing continents, and building vast maritime empires. The invention of gunpowder did not just change who fought and how they fought. It changed the very scale and nature of conflict. It turned war from a contest of aristocratic prowess into an industrial process of slaughter. It demolished the physical walls of the castle, and with them, the social and political structures of the medieval world. It was a messy, loud, and violent invention, but its role in clearing the way for the modern nation-state and the global balance of power is undeniable. It was the explosive force that blasted the old world apart. For all the changes that had come before, one fundamental truth of human existence remained constant: the limit of power. For millennia, nearly all work was done by the muscle of humans and their domesticated animals, supplemented only by the wind in a sail or the flow of a river. The pace of life was the pace of nature. Production was small-scale, local, and painstakingly slow. The vast majority of humanity lived and worked on the land, their lives little changed from their ancestors 1,000 years prior. Then, in the 18th century, a new source of power was unlocked, one that would remake the world in its image. It began with coal and steam. The invention of an efficient steam engine by James Watt was the breakthrough. By burning coal to heat water into steam and using the pressure of that steam to drive a piston, humanity had, for the first time, a source of power that was not dependent on muscle, wind, or water. It was portable, tireless, and could be scaled to sizes previously unimaginable. It was a prime mover, an engine that could be put to work doing almost anything, and its first great task was to power the Industrial Revolution. This new power transformed the textile industry first. A single steam engine could drive hundreds of mechanical looms and spinning jennies in a vast factory, producing more cloth in a day than an entire village of artisans could in a year. The factory system was born. People began to leave the countryside in droves, pulled towards the promise of work in the new, rapidly growing industrial cities. It was one of the greatest migrations in human history, a mass movement from the field to the factory. Life in these new cities was often brutal. They were overcrowded, unsanitary, and polluted by the smoke that poured from countless factory chimneys. A new social structure emerged, with a wealthy class of factory owners and industrialists at the top, and a vast, impoverished urban working class, the proletariat, at the bottom. The rhythm of life was no longer dictated by the sun and the seasons, but by the factory whistle and the relentless pace of the machine. It was a new kind of existence, with new hardships and new opportunities. The revolution in power soon spread beyond the factory walls. The steam engine was put on rails, creating the locomotive, and on ships, creating the steamboat. The world shrank once again. Goods and people could be transported across continents and oceans with a speed and reliability that would have seemed like magic just a century before. This connected economies, allowed for the exploitation of resources on a global scale, and bound the world together in a network of industrial production and trade. Then came a second wave of innovation, a technological revolution driven by new discoveries in science. The harnessing of electricity by figures like Faraday, Edison, and Tesla brought light to the darkness and a new, even more versatile form of power. The electric motor and the telegraph began to reshape cities and communication. The invention of the internal combustion engine, powered by oil, would eventually put the power of a factory into the hands of an individual, in the form of the automobile. This period of intense invention, from the late 18th to the early 20th century, fundamentally altered every aspect of human life. It created immense wealth and staggering poverty. It built cities, connected the globe, and gave humanity a command over the material world that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. We are all children of this revolution. The electricity that powers our homes, the mass-produced goods we use every day, the very structure of our global economy, all are its direct legacy. It was the moment humanity learned to build its own fire, and the smoke has yet to clear. Throughout most of human history, life was a fragile and fleeting thing. Even a simple cut could lead to a fatal infection. Childbirth was a perilous ordeal for both mother and child, and entire populations could be devastated by invisible enemies, plagues like smallpox and cholera that swept through communities with terrifying speed. The average life expectancy was Honestly, shockingly low, maybe 30 or 40 years. The world was filled with ghosts, the children who never reached adulthood, the young parents taken by fever. Survival was often, well, just a matter of luck. But the revolution that changed all of this was not one of machines, but of understanding. It was a scientific quest to understand the nature of disease itself. A pivotal moment came in the 19th century with the development of germ theory by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. The discovery that many diseases were caused by microscopic organisms, bacteria, and viruses was a real revelation. Suddenly, the invisible enemy now had a name and a face. If these germs could be fought, then disease itself could be conquered. This new knowledge led to a profound shift in public health. The simple acts of washing hands, sterilizing surgical instruments, and ensuring clean drinking water, championed by figures like Joseph Lister and John Snow, had a dramatic impact. The importance of sanitation and hygiene was finally understood. Sewers were built, water supplies were protected, and for the first time, cities began to become healthier places to live. Mortality rates, especially among children, began to fall. Alongside prevention came the power of immunization. Building on Edward Jenner's earlier work with smallpox, Pasteur and others developed vaccines for diseases like rabies and anthrax. The concept was honestly miraculous. By exposing the body to a weakened or dead form of a pathogen, the body could be trained to defend itself against the real thing. Vaccination became one of the most powerful tools in the history of public health, a shield that could protect entire populations, eventually leading to the complete eradication of smallpox, one of humanity's deadliest scourges. The 20th century brought the so-called magic bullets, antibiotics. Alexander Fleming's accidental discovery of penicillin in 1928 was a huge turning point. Here was a substance that could kill harmful bacteria inside the human body without harming the patient. Infections that had once been a death sentence, pneumonia, meningitis, sepsis from a wound, could now be cured with a simple course of treatment. The age of antibiotics transformed surgery from a desperate gamble into a routine procedure and saved, honestly, countless millions of lives. The pace of discovery just accelerated from there. The development of new surgical techniques, anesthesia, blood transfusions, and advanced diagnostic tools like X-rays and MRI scans gave doctors an unprecedented ability to intervene and heal. We learned to manage chronic conditions like diabetes with insulin. We developed treatments for heart disease and many forms of cancer, turning once fatal diagnoses into manageable illnesses. The human body, once a black box of mysterious ailments, was becoming a system that could be understood, repaired, and maintained. The cumulative effect of these breakthroughs has been nothing short of astonishing. In just over a century, the average global life expectancy has more than doubled. A child born today in many parts of the world can expect to live into their 80s, a lifespan that would have been almost mythical to our ancestors. This revolution is not over. We still face immense challenges from new diseases, antibiotic resistance, and the ailments of old age. But the journey of modern medicine represents one of humanity's greatest triumphs, the ongoing battle to claim our lives back from the randomness of disease and death. By the middle of the 20th century, humanity was facing a crisis of its own making. Our success in fighting disease had, well, led to a population explosion. The number of people on the planet was growing at a rate never before seen in history. Experts and demographers issued dire warnings of impending mass famine. They predicted that our ability to produce food would soon be outstripped by the sheer number of mouths to feed. The Malthusian catastrophe, it seemed, was finally at hand. The world held its breath, bracing for a future of widespread starvation. The solution came not from discovering new lands to farm, but from a revolution in the science of farming itself. This was the Green Revolution, a period of intense agricultural research and development led by a remarkable scientist named Norman Borlaug. Working in Mexico, Borlaug and his team dedicated themselves to a single, urgent goal: to breed new varieties of staple crops, particularly wheat, that could produce vastly greater yields than traditional strains. It was a race against time to feed a hungry world. The breakthrough came with the development of high-yield variety, or HYV, dwarf wheat. Traditional wheat plants were tall and slender. When heavily fertilized to increase their grain production, they would grow too top-heavy and collapse before they could be harvested, a phenomenon called lodging. Borlaug's team, crossbred thousands of varieties to create a new type of wheat that was short, sturdy, and disease-resistant. This dwarf wheat could absorb massive amounts of chemical fertilizer and, instead of growing taller, would channel that energy into producing more grain. The results were astonishing. The yields from these new varieties were 2, 3, even 4 times greater than what traditional farming could produce. Borlaug's wheat was introduced to countries facing the greatest threat of famine, like India and Pakistan, in the 1960s. Within a few years, these nations went from being on the brink of starvation to achieving self-sufficiency in grain production. The impending famine was averted. Norman Borlaug is credited with saving over 1 billion lives, arguably more than any other single person in history. The revolution extended beyond wheat. Similar techniques were used to develop high-yield varieties of rice and corn. The success of these new crops, however, was dependent on a package of modern agricultural techniques. The HYV seeds had to be used in conjunction with synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and controlled irrigation. It was a complete transformation of agriculture, moving it from a system based on natural cycles to a highly industrialized, science-driven process. This incredible success, however, was not without its costs, and it has sparked decades of debate. The massive increase in the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides has had significant environmental consequences, leading to water pollution and loss of biodiversity. The reliance on irrigation has put immense strain on water resources in many parts of the world. The shift to monoculture farming, growing vast fields of a single crop, has made the food supply potentially more vulnerable to new diseases or pests. The Green Revolution represents a profound ongoing dilemma. It saved 1 billion people from starvation and allowed our global population to continue to grow, but it did so by creating a system of food production that has a heavy environmental footprint and questions of long-term sustainability. It highlights the complex trade-offs inherent in our quest to master our planet. The challenge for the next generation of agricultural scientists is to spark a second green revolution, one that can continue to feed a growing world, but do so in a way that is truly sustainable and in harmony with the natural world it depends on. For most of history, information was physical. It was a clay tablet, a papyrus scroll, a printed book, a vinyl record, a photograph on paper. To move information was to move an object. Its speed was limited by the fastest vehicle, its reach by the most robust distribution network. This physical world of information is known as analog, a continuous variable signal that is a direct representation of the original. A groove on a record is an analog of a sound wave. The world was about to be rebuilt on a different principle entirely. The digital revolution was a shift from the physical to the abstract, from analog to digital. The core idea is breathtakingly simple. Any information, a number, a word, a picture, a sound, can be represented by a string of binary digits, ones and zeros. This binary code is the universal language of computers. The revolution began quietly, in the minds of mathematicians and engineers like Alan Turing and Claude Shannon, who laid the theoretical foundations for computation and information theory in the middle of the 20th century. The first computers were colossal machines filling entire rooms, built with vacuum tubes and relays. They were expensive, slow by our standards, and accessible only to governments and large research institutions. The critical breakthrough was the invention of the transistor, and later, the integrated circuit, the microchip. This allowed for the radical miniaturization of electronic components. The power of a room-sized computer could now be etched onto a tiny sliver of silicon. The personal computer was born. This placed the power of digital computation into the hands of individuals. Suddenly, people could write documents, perform complex calculations, and create digital art from their desktops. But the true revolution came when these individual computers were connected together. The creation of the internet, which grew out of a US military project called ARPANET, was the spark that lit the fuse. It was a network of networks, a system that allowed any computer to talk to any other computer on the planet. The result was an explosion of connectivity. Information was liberated from its physical constraints. An email could cross the globe in an instant. A website could be accessed by millions of people simultaneously. With the creation of the World Wide Web, the internet was transformed from a tool for specialists into a global platform for communication, commerce, and culture. Knowledge that once required a trip to a library was now available at our fingertips, through a search engine. This digital transformation has rewired almost every aspect of modern life. It has changed how we work, how we shop, how we learn, and how we connect with one another. It has created entire new industries while disrupting and destroying old ones. It has enabled social movements and political change, giving a voice to billions. It has created a global, interconnected economy that operates 24 hours a day. The smartphone put this power in our pocket, making the internet a constant companion. We now live in a world saturated with digital information. Our lives are increasingly recorded as data points, our social interactions mediated through screens. This revolution has brought unprecedented access to knowledge and connection, but also new challenges, concerns about privacy, the spread of misinformation, and the nature of digital addiction. And we have built a second world, a virtual one made of pure information, and we are all still learning how to live in it. It is a world where distance has been all but erased, and the flow of ones and zeros shapes our reality. For our entire journey so far, our inventions have been tools. They were extensions of our bodies, the plow to till the soil, the wheel to carry our burdens, the engine to do our work. Even the computer, for all its power, was fundamentally a tool that followed the instructions we gave it. It was a calculator, a filing system, a communication device of incredible speed, but it did not think. We are now standing at the threshold of a new era, creating inventions that are extensions not just of our bodies, but of our minds. This is the age of artificial intelligence. AI is the science of making machines smart. It is the attempt to build systems that can perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. Tasks like recognizing a face in a crowd, understanding spoken language, making a complex medical diagnosis, or driving a car. The dream of AI is as old as stories of golems and automatons, but it is only in the 21st century, with the convergence of massive datasets and immense computing power, that this dream is rapidly becoming a reality. The current revolution in AI is powered by a technique called machine learning, and specifically, deep learning. Instead of programming a computer with a rigid set of rules, we can now create neural networks, inspired by the structure of the human brain, and train them on vast amounts of data. A computer can be shown millions of pictures of cats, and it will, on its own, learn to identify a cat. It learns by example and experience, much like a human child. This ability to learn is what makes modern AI so powerful and so different from anything that has come before. We are already surrounded by this technology, often without realizing it. It is the AI that recommends a movie for you to watch, that filters spam from your email, that translates a foreign language on your phone, and that answers your questions through a virtual assistant. It is being used to discover new drugs, to optimize energy grids, and to analyze financial markets. These are often called narrow AI, systems that are incredibly good at one specific task. But the ultimate goal for some researchers, and the source of both great excitement and profound anxiety, is the creation of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. This would be an AI that possesses the flexible, creative, and common-sense reasoning of a human being. An AGI would not just be good at one task, it could learn and master almost any intellectual task that a human can. The creation of such an entity would be an event on par with the emergence of life itself, an invention that could invent things on its own. The implications of this unfolding revolution are staggering and deeply uncertain. Automation powered by AI is beginning to reshape the workforce, with machines now capable of performing not just manual labor, but cognitive tasks previously done by white-collar workers. This raises fundamental questions about the future of work and the structure of our economy. Who will benefit from this new productivity, and what will be the role of humans in a world where machines can think? We are in the very first moments of this new chapter. We are creating entities that can learn, adapt, and potentially, one day, surpass us. This invention is not just another tool, it could be our final invention. It holds the promise of solving humanity's greatest challenges, from disease to climate change. But it also forces us to confront fundamental questions about our own nature, our purpose, and our place in the universe. We are teaching our machines to think, and in doing so, they are forcing us to think more deeply than ever before about what it means to be human. Our journey has been a long one. We've moved from the simple act of planting seeds in the soil all the way to the dawn of machines that can learn and reason. We have witnessed how a single idea, a single invention, can pivot the entire course of human history onto a new and unwritten path. So, the real question now is not about the past, but about the future. What could be the next invention that moves us into an entirely new stage of our history? What will be the next great transition for humanity? Will it be the harnessing of clean, limitless energy like practical fusion, making power cheap and pollution a relic of the past? Will it be the final victory over disease, with cures for cancer or dementia turning our greatest fears into problems of a bygone era? Could it be the development of brain-computer interfaces that merge our minds directly with machines, fundamentally changing how we think, remember, and communicate? Or will it be something we can't even name yet, something as unimaginable to us today as a smartphone would have been to a farmer tilling their field 10,000 years ago? Whatever it is, it will almost certainly do what every invention on our list has done. It will change how we live our daily lives. It will change how we relate to each other, and it will profoundly change what we believe is possible. And here is the part that people often forget. The next big invention might not come from a famous laboratory or a giant corporation. It could start as a small idea in someone's notebook, a side project in a garage, or a persistent question that simply refuses to leave your mind. So, I will leave you with this. If the next great transition in human history depended on people like you thinking a little bigger, what problem would you choose to solve? And what is one small step you can take toward that idea this week? If you enjoyed this journey through our past and our possible future, tell me in the comments. Which invention do you think changed humanity the most, and what do you hope the next one will be? Thanks for watching.